You know how we're always trying to find a connection to human health and biology and whatnot, like justifying why you're studying something. This is from our executive producer, Glued with Gold. And let me show y'all. So this is the image takeaway that I was kind of highlight, that it was just like, oh look, it's a chimp and they're performing a task. There are titles where it's like, I have no idea what it means. It's like, I have a PhD, I have no idea what it means, right? And if no one knows what it means, like, it's not going to be accessible and no one's going to read it, right? So what I liked about this too, it's like, this is a paper a title that I can understand, right? Audience presence influences cognitive task performance in chimpanzees. Awesome. If there's an audience watching, it has an influence on chimps and what they end up doing. Here we go. Let's do the highlights first. The highlights are not in every paper. They are not put into every publication, but I do like when there are highlights. The highlights of a paper will actually break down, these are the big takeaways in very, very easy sentences. So 6 chimpanzees participated in computer-controlled cognitive tasks over the course of 6 years. This is a big point of contention that we've talked about in the past, is replicate number. 6 replicates is not a lot, but what else are you going to do, right? Chimps are very, very difficult to have. Chimp performance changed with the number and types of audience. So the type of audience that they had and how many audience members were there influenced how the behavior ended up happening. Audiences may influence the perception of reward, cognitive load, and concentration, and audience effects may have emerged before the development of reputation-based society. And meaning that before you had like logistical scores that were being compared between and amongst different individuals, like within, like, you know, trust scores, like if I see Tatum doing X, that means that I trust him to do X because he's the best at doing X and he's got a reputation now for it. It may this is like an evolutionary suggestion that animals are able to learn even prior to this in being in a social group. And what's really neat is they had a graphical abstract. And Glued with Gold, you mentioned the difficulty that you would, or that it was the opposite of what you'd expect. But so here's the thing. So Glued, they tested, it is the opposite only in a smidge, Glued with Gold. When it was an easy task, if the audience was watching, performance went down compared to if there was no audience. If it was something easy, the chimps should be able to do. So like very low difficulty, low cognitive demand, there was nothing that ended up like it worked it did not work well. However, if it was a difficult task with increased cognitive demand, the chimp performance became better. And here's the cool part, I think, y'all. The audience were not other chimps. They were people. And they were people that were not regular care staff, which I think is important, right? Because if it's regular care staff, this could be that could be influencing the output a fair bit too. So it's, to break it down, y'all, what they got was a chimp is caring that a different species is watching it do something. That, again, feels to me a little bit like watching a streamer. No, so Jay, here's where there's like so many different variables that would have been great to try with. I would have loved, in the perfect world, I would have loved to have seen other apes, like other chimps watch, right? Does it happen within your species? I think that's a fundamental important question. And then, like you said too, what if you put and train the goodest boys? You put a bunch of dogs in there to watch. Is it going to have the same effect? Or is it just because we are humanoid enough, or like chimpanoid, that they can tell our emotions from facial expressions, and then just like body-wise, we're just similar enough to where it's a match? It's a total maybe. I'm totally just like hypothesizing, if you will, on here, but that doesn't mean that it can't apply, right? The reason that they even did this study was that chimps have a hierarchical society. So there's someone in charge, and then they're below, and then it just keeps going down. So that it wasn't known that if they have this hierarchical structure anyway, if there's going to be any influence from watching and someone else watching them. They had the special chimp site study. So this was done at Kyoto University, where there's humans hanging out with chimps and they're interacting, and they use these touch screens that we just showed for a reward. And so it was a unique opportunity to explore similarities and differences with these like crew of audience members that were being watched. What is important to note, again, Glued, I love that you picked up on this right away, is that it's certain types of tasks, right? Especially Glued, like, because you said Glued, I'm like, I wonder if it's surprised it's not the opposite. So here, it's only for difficult tasks does the performance increase when being watched. and then it goes down the performance if it's for an easy task. And yeah, as Hugen points out, if you had dummies, body language, facial expressions, what they would have done, and the same thing Jay's saying too, facial cues are similar enough to influence them. And then glued, I don't know if the study's been done in humans, but glued, you're bringing up a very good point of if you bring into the fold any type of neurodiversity, would you get the same, opposite, totally different, no difference, right? Output. Because it needs to be done right. And actually, the 6 chimp replicates that were done were pretty close in terms of the data, so it seems like there's not an outlier in terms of the chimps, but presumably there's neurodiversity in chimps as well, right? Like that's just not limited to a human phenomena. At least I would think of that one. Yeah, Starmy pulled it up too. The control here is that they just have a camera on it, so that they just have the cameras watching and there's just no audience, and that's the baseline that they're measuring up against. Yeah, like here's some of the similarities. So you can see there's the black dots indicate the replicate for a given animal, and then here is the total audience count. So you can see with certain kinds of tasks, I mean, especially this one, like increased audience members, how that affected the task ability. So it's like almost the way the average plays out, it's like having an audience member makes it better, and then they also varied audience member numbers as well. Yeah, and this wasn't looked at glued. They didn't do any. What they could have done is a flavor of maybe stress gene measurement, because if what the counter argument could be is maybe the apes are put under some flavor of stress, and that stress is getting them to like hyper focus and maybe do better. That's a total guess, right? But maybe there could be a role for stress as well, if there's some kind of stress element that's doing the like having an influence there. So it's not to say that these animals aren't stressed. They could be stressed from the audience, but it could be the thing that's influencing them one way or another depending on what task they're doing. What's the history of chimps in the test? I'd imagine they would have a lot of human interaction. Yep. So it's these paper J was run over the course of 6 years, and so you presumably there's been a lot of interaction over the course of the 6 years, and that we don't know the history of the chimps in the paper of what else they have been used for in terms of like what other experiments, and that might also be influencing what we're seeing. Right? There's chimps are very, very difficult to work with because there's so few research institutes that are accredited, safe, applied, if that makes sense. Like it's just not a commonplace thing for chimps to be had in a lab. And so because they're so rare, you reuse them all. You don't just like sack one, right? You don't kill one to like after an experiment's done like you might do with a mouse. You'll do another experiment with that chimp and you just keep going and going. Basic task may trigger hyperfocus. Maybe, right, like the simple one, and that's not enough to induce the stress. There's a lot of variables here, right? And part of the limiting factor is because it is a chimp that you're working with. That's an important thing to note too. So learn behavior of the chimp is to do their best for the humans. Could be, Jay. Although that's not the only thing happening here. If it was just that we're just doing really, really well because we have a human that we're trying to perform for, then you wouldn't expect the data with the simple task being the opposite. If they use the fresh chimps, I would love to see that, Hugen, but that is unfortunately not feasible. Like, you're just not going to get the opportunity to do that. Like, there's just so few chimps that are available for research study that it's like, this is what we have, this is what you're limited to, and that's that, unfortunately. But yeah, that's a great point. But I don't also know, like, it might be difficult what to do with really, really fresh chimps, Hugen, in the sense of if they haven't interacted with humans, because you have to interact with them to train them that this is the test and this is the output of the test. Like, you have to train them. So I feel like we're getting into a lot of difficulties. I think maybe the best experiments to do as follow-up, Hugen, I really like your idea of the mannequins or dummies. Maybe even a very lifelike looking mannequin, right? It's just it doesn't have facial expression, like that it can't like react. Again, this needs to be tested. I'm not sure because it just hasn't been run, but that'll be a really cool experiment. And then Jay, the other thing I really like is your hypothesis on let's get another animal in there and see what the difference is in terms of the task. To be clear, this isn't me knocking the paper. This is just something that I found was really cool and like an interesting thought-provoking like exercise, right? Like they vary the number of how many like audience members there are. They even said here it's distraction hypothesis, in which there is a potential audience effect on concentration, which is actually what y'all are pulling out too. And so the way they're kind of arguing some of those is like the differences in the tasks. But here, like this is the data, like, and even this, like, so glued, this one where is one where it doesn't look like there's much of an effect, but apparently there is still a statistically significant one. This is the difficult task, and here is each of the 6 chimps, with the y-axis being more audience members. And what you find is that there is this increased curve. When you increase the audience numbers, the chimp's performance goes up, right? You could the difficulty in humans is compared to these chimps. We know the life history of these chimps. We know every variable that has been in their lives because they have been at this center. If I take you and then I take me and I take Glued with Gold and we put us through these same tests, need people to watch me. I don't like this. I don't like it. Please don't watch me. And that could all be through like influence of our lives, or it could be genetic influence too. Like there's so many of these things that could be part of it. And so I think we could do it in humans, but it's all those extra things that we have to account for versus there's a little bit less of that with the chimp because at least you know the background. I will say this chimp, this Ayumu, is the odd one out, but apparently this is like when they ran the statistical test on it, this was still statistically significant. In terms of it, there was increasing performance with increased audience members. It just wasn't the same intensity as these other ones. Also, the black dots, y'all, indicate the tests that were run. If you go into more depth, like if they were to figure, this would have been a real big issue, but figuring out like what neurons are firing, or maybe even like what y'all are suggesting with these additional experiments, that maybe would have catapulted the paper a little bit higher. Or maybe even Jay, like what if they tested humans? Like if the paper is on the chimps and the other half is on the humans and they do a little bit of comparison. Or, okay, or honestly, like, okay, if I had unlimited money, the way I would have done this was see if this happens in mice, where you can do some genetic tricks, because you can teach a mouse to do different types of tasks. Have an audience then. I don't know if this would work, right? But just come with me on this journey. Maybe it does work, where having mice watching other mice changes their ability to do the task. And then the end of the paper is, oh, by the way, we did this in chimps, and it also seems to recapitulate. Or there you go, corvids too, right? Werewolf, that would be a totally good one to test as well, where you would have the ability to do a little bit more invasive testing, where you could like maybe figure out neurons or like some kind of like methodology as to how this works, and then you connect it to the chimps at the very end of it, because you're limited in terms of how much information you can actually identify and pull in. And yeah, I feel like we're not going to be able to really pull in enough info with using just the chimps. And there is just a function of that is just because they're chimps, they're difficult to work on. Money, everything about them is not straightforward. And so that could be a reason why that, it would be neat to have it on like mice or something else first. That is true. Your scores will show a threat. So Jay, to get back about the human problem, the way that you can maybe get an average. And so instead of having a graph, there's benefits and detriments to both kind of graphs, but having a graph like this where each of the black dots is the chimp doing the task again. What if each of those dots is a different person, a different human test? So like this person got tested with 2 audience members. This person got tested with 3, this one with 4. And so you just do a ton of replicates, right? So like each one of the dots is a different human, different test, different audience members. That should wash out the effects of environmental pressure if it's a true, observable, repeatable scientific observation that's like something that should be studied and looked at. Then it should be seen. If it's not seen, if everything's flat, then it's probably just not a thing in humans, or it's not just detectable. Repeating the same test, shouldn't your performance increase? It should. And that actually, Jay, we don't get a delineation here of this, like, you see how there's a cluster up top and a cluster below? It doesn't tell us if the cluster below was when they first started doing the task and the cluster above was, at a different point in time. So it's just something to further be studied too. They do specify, Starmy, what is difficult and easy. So they have like a couple of different tests, and they've listing out how the tests work and like what they define as easy and difficult. So that is all written out in the paper, and I'll post that in the link too. Could another scientist repeat this test with humans and compare it to these results, or would different scientists need to do it too differently? Hopefully, Casey, they could do a comparison. I think the test might have to be fundamentally different between the chimp and the human, but the trend could still be looked at and analyzed. I think it's just you could make the data comparison even if it's a slightly different test because there are already variables that are going to be present whenever you bring in a person. But yeah, y'all, this is the paper, right? There is not a lot left. I still thought it was interesting. I hope y'all did too.